Hi everyone, welcome to Smart City Institute's webinar, Global Perspectives on the Smart Cities. I'm Nagumo, Executive Managing Director of Smart City Institute Japan, your host of this program today. And today we have a topic of the comparison of successes and the challenges on open data utilization between UK and Japan, a move towards UK-Japan collaboration. And before we begin this program, a little housekeeping message to the viewers. We'll have two presentations today, one from Japan and one from UK. And after that, we'll move on to open discussion. And we'd like to have comments and questions from viewers through the chat box. I'll pick them up after the two presentations during the open discussion. Without further ado, let me introduce 6 esteemed speakers, presenters today. Number one, Mr. Olivier Thereaux, Head of Research and Development, Open Data Institute, ODI. Hi, Olivier. Nice to see you.
Good morning, konbanwa.
Hi, konbanwa. Nice to see you. Number two, Mr. James Maddison, Senior Consultant at ODI.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Hi, James. Thank you for attending. Number three, Ms. Mitsuyo Nishioka, Senior Smart Cities Specialist at NEC. Nishioka-san.
Sorry for the delay. Hi, everyone. Good morning and good evening.
Hi, Nishioka-san. Thank you for attending. Fourth person, Dr. Jiahui, Strategy and AI Lead at Asian Cambridge Consultants, PTE Limited.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, nice to see you. All right, fifth person, Mr. Richard Luis, Senior Trade and FDI Manager, APAC Technology and Smart Cities, Department of International Trade.
And good evening from London.
Hi, nice to see you again. Right, and next person, Mr. Jack Minty, Digital and Data Attaché, British Embassy, Japan.
Good morning, good evening, everyone.
Right, and today we missed Mr. Phillip White, who usually attends the session, and we have Jack Minty as to fulfill the Mr. White's place. So thank you for attending. All right, so we have introduced all the speakers today. And as I explained at the beginning, we have two consecutive presentations, one by ODI and the next by Nishioka-san. So let's move on to the presentation. So Olivier, stage is all yours.
Thank you, Tak. Let me share my screen. You should all see my screen now. First, thank you so much for having me today. This short presentation is a summary of some of the perspective of the Open Data Institute and the research that my team and I have been conducted for the past 5 years in the use of open data and the challenges and the value creation around the usage and stewardship of data in cities. First, very briefly, an introduction to the Open Data Institute. We're a non-profit organization based in London, and we work with companies and government worldwide to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem with a vision to make a world where data works for everyone. Today, the discussion we're having is very much about the perspective on open data and personal data, and the prompt and the invitation that I had was really interesting in that it was really about how do we make it work for both open data and personal data. And I would like to start by saying that based on the research that we've been conducting at the ODI, it's not really a dichotomy. Typically, when people think of open data, they will think of data that anyone can access, use, and share, which is the definition. But typically, they will think of open data as data about government, that is data that is for the sake of transparency and efficiency, and they will think of open data as being used by citizens. On the other hand, typically when people think about personal data, they think of it as something that is sensitive and requiring strict access. They will think of personal data as something that is being used largely for either surveillance or profit, which of course creates distrust. And of course, when we think about personal data, we think of citizens as the data subjects of the data, not as the users of data. And if I'm going to be doing anything in those next 20 minutes, is really trying to prove to you that while those things are largely true, there is actually something in between, and that this dichotomy is actually a false dichotomy. And it is due to a few key misconceptions. And I'm going to go through 4 of them, 3 here, and then 1 just afterwards. First misconception is that data about people can be made open. As I said earlier, personal data typically is something that is quite sensitive, and people don't want data about them to be made open. That is normal. I don't want my medical records to be made available publicly. However, and that's really important to know, some open data can be data about people and can be personal data. For instance, in countries like France, there are registers of public servants, registers of professionals, and that data is personal data. It has data about people that is identifiable, but it can be made open with a public purpose. So that's the first misconception, and that tells us already that the space between open data and personal data is not as separated as one might think. The second one is, second misconception is that people do not want data about them to be shared. And while that is generally true, as I said earlier, I want personal data about me to be kept safe and not shared with people who shouldn't get access to it. But what we've seen during the pandemic is that data about people was frequently shared between organizations, between governments and companies, and that had general population support. I'll give an example of that later, but that's really important in that, again, if there is a public purpose, data about people can be made open, can be shared, and actually there is general support for that. And the third misconception is that sensitive personal data must be protected. I'm exaggerating here by saying it's a misconception, because of course sensitive personal data must be protected, but its access can also be stewarded and made more open through anonymization. That's important for us to realize, is that personal data, it can be made more open, and that data is not something that is static. Data can be processed, data can be anonymized, data can be de-identified, and there are a lot of processes that can mean that some data that is otherwise sensitive can be stewarded and made available to people, whether that is research data, or data that is made anonymous through, for instance, the statistics bodies that most countries have, and they publish data about people, but they do that through robust anonymization. The last misconception, and that's the biggest one about open data and personal data, is that there are set roles for data. The typical roles in open data and personal data about cities is that, you know, the local government its role is to publish the open data. So it has data about itself, about its operations, sometimes about its citizens, and it publishes that open data. And then the private sector has a completely different role, typically, which is to collect and often, yes, make profit from personal data. And then citizens are both the subjects of data collection and the user of open data. That is typical, and that is generally true. But the misconception is to think that people only sit within those boundaries. And the thing that is important for us to realize, to understand why those roles can be much more fluid, is that cities are complex ecosystems. And I'm going to give you a few examples that really break these misconceptions about set roles. And I've chosen for the sake of this presentation a few examples from London and from Tokyo and other places to give you a flavor of what is happening with open data and personal data in the 2 capital cities of the UK and Japan. First, this is a slide that I have been borrowing from the chief digital officer of London, and it's a really great example of how data in London is used by really different people for really different purposes. I'm not going to go through all of the examples here, but it's really, really interesting to see that London has really built into their data strategy the fact that the data that they hold or the data that they collect is going to be used by different people. It's going to be used by City Hall. It's going to be used by private sector companies to innovate. It's going to be used by citizens to better understand and innovate as well. And it's going to be used by researchers. It's going to be used by scholars. And so we see here already that the usage of the data is really, really much broader than the whole dichotomy that we saw just earlier. In the flip side to that, and that's a really good example of seeing how citizens are not just users of open data or data subjects, so people about whom the data is, but they can actually be contributors to open data. And this is a project that is quite recent in Tokyo, and it's a broad project to create a digital twin of the metropolis. But what's really interesting is that it puts to contribution the citizens. There is a big element of people participation, in this case by having people help create a 3D map of the city. And we see here again that the role of the citizens isn't just to be data subject, isn't just to be keeping government to account through looking at open data. They are contributors. They are first-class citizens of the work towards open data. One last example, which is broadening it beyond the cities of London and Tokyo. And we see here in the space of data and climate change that there are a lot of initiatives that are collective, that are done by either non-profit organizations or universities to map cities and understand them better so that better decisions can be made about them. And if there's anything that we're learning here is that just like the cities are complex ecosystems with many different people who come in to live, who work, who visit cities, the data ecosystem is also a complex thing. And so at the Open Data Institute, we've been developing tools to help people understand that ecosystem and go beyond the simplistic nature of the dichotomy about which roles are done by citizens and which role by City Hall and which role by companies. And this is a tool that really looks at the flows of data, the flows of information, the flows of money, and what roles are fulfilled by which entities. And it really looks at a very broad set of roles: data users, data subjects, but also researchers, but also beneficiaries, which are not necessarily the people who are represented in the data. Very often, beneficiaries of data use are people who are completely outside of the data set. You've got also people who are going to be innovating. You've got also people who are going to be stewarding the data. And that's really, really important for us to understand that in a complex system where data flows create value, where data flows create better decisions, you've got some really, really tricky issues about creation of value, but also minimizing risk of harm when data about people is being shared. And that's the concept of data stewardship, which is a concept that has been developed by people like the ODI, but also internationally by organizations like the GovLab. And the key idea there is that in order for data to be used to make better decisions, to create innovation, you need to steward it. You need to make sure that it is made available to people who need it, but also that it is safeguarded against harms. And how data is stewarded really affects what type of products, services, and insights can be used to create from the data. Typically, what happens is that the organizations that collects the data stewards it for themselves, and that creates some value, obviously. But as a study by the OECD in, I think, 2019 showed, the value creation of stewardship through sharing of data, through sharing in ways that are ethical and safe, can create more than 20 to 50 times more value than stewarding for the organization that collected the data itself. But in order to do that, we really need to make sure that we avoid a few pitfalls. as I said earlier, we can create positive impacts by having good stewardship of data. But you've got two centrifugal forces against that. One is that citizens, especially, are afraid of bad usage of data. We've had many, many scandals in the past decade about data mining and data being used for unethical purposes, or data being collected about people without their consent. And so we need to make sure that the way that data is stewarded is done with trust. But as I said earlier, the other one, the other centrifugal force is the notion of data hoarding, which is basically, I've collected the data, I'm going to be maximizing the value of this data. Why would I share it with other people? And the truth there is that while that is generally true, that the cost of collection is borne by the data steward, the value creation by sharing and opening data can be massive. We've seen a few examples of data being shared, data being made open. But the big question there, of course, is how do we make sure that the value creation is fair with regards to the cost of stewardship? And likewise, how do we make sure that when we make data more open as possible, that we don't create harms for people, whether they are people about whom the data is, or people who are going to be affected by those decisions? And so another tool that I want to talk to you about briefly today is the data ethics canvas, or more generally, the domain of data ethics. It's really important whenever we think about creating value from data through sharing, through making data open, that we think about both the legality of it, that's obvious. When we collect data, share data, use data, typically we operate in one, or more often than not, many legislative and regulatory frameworks. So knowing and understanding that regulatory context and legal context is very important. But what's also important is understanding the impact of the use, sharing, and collection of data on people, whether they are the data subjects or beyond the data subjects. And in order to minimize those harms, typically the best way to do it is to not just minimize the collection and use, but also to engage with the people who are going to be affected. And this tool, a very simple tool, basically a list of 15 questions about data projects, is one of many ways of ensuring that the data collection, the usage, and the sharing of data can be made in more ethical ways. I pointed just earlier to two links, one which is the authoritative link from the ODI, where we have been developing the data ethics canvas, a number of other tools, training, and so on and so forth. But because of the audience today, I also want to point that a team at Waseda University, in collaboration with Kyoto University, if I'm not mistaken, have been creating a Japanese version of the data ethics canvas. So I would encourage the audience today to look at both resources in English and in Japanese and adopt those tools. So, in summary, the message that I'm coming to you today is that while open data is typically thought of as a tool for government to be transparent to its citizens, there is so much more to it. And more importantly, there is no clear dichotomy. There is a spectrum from open data to closed, personal, sensitive data. And we need to understand how we can govern this data, how we can steward this data through technical means like anonymization, but also through social and societal means like ethical practices, to make sure that data is made available to people who need it to make better decisions, but do that in such a way that minimize harm and maximize the value creation and the positive impacts of data stewardship. Thank you very much for your attention. Tak, I'm giving back the floor.
Right. Thank you very much, Olivier, for excellent presentation. I can't wait for asking you a question, but let's move on to Nishioka-san's presentation before. And after that, we have our open discussion session. Okay, Nishioka-san, it's all yours.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Nagumo-san. Let me share my screen first. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Okay, so my name is Mitsuyo Nishioka from NEC Corporation. I'm based in Tokyo, and today I'd like to talk you about the open data utilization, mostly in Japan. And my presentation is see the open data utilization through NEC's activities for smart city. For smart city, NEC has City OS, which is the quite important foundation for the data exchange of the open data and personal data exchange. And inside NEC City OS, we are integrating Fireware, which is the open source software originally developed in Europe with the fund from EU. And NEC has been contributing to the development as a part of the group of the development of the program, and since 2011. And based on that experience, and we are using it as part of our CTOS. And this Fireware is handling the open data exchange and utilization. And in addition to that, to enrich the services with the personalization, the next requirement is to use the personal data. So we have the personal data platform inside this CTOS, and to deal with the content management for opt-in, opt-out, and other things. So those two data exchange capabilities are accessible through Open API from devices to upload data, or from application to access to the data to utilize for the services. So and just one more thing about NEC has a cutting edge technology. So we are integrating AI for analytics or biometrics like face recognition and so on for the authentication, and it can be touchless authentication and identity federation and other securities to make those OS and platform ready for the public use, and should be very reliable. And so based on using this Fireware and platform, we also providing services and so on, but I'd like to look into the cases to see the open data utilization. Then our NEC's smart city business has been started from Europe actually, and we have several success stories in Portugal and Spain and so on, and we expanded our experience and knowledge to Japan. And also India is now a very hot market because Indian government is adopting huge investment for the smart city mission. So I'd like to start from the first case from Lisbon. And in Lisbon, and in 2017, we delivered Fireware as a data platform for them. The CDO in Lisbon City has strong belief that the power of data. Sorry. And for the data platform, we integrated 200 data set from the beginning, and they are coming from 40 legacy systems, and 10 from Lisbon City itself, and another 30 from external partners like police agency, railway, airport, transport department, and so on. So they are not all open data, but they have the 200 data set integrated and visualized on the dashboard. And now they have the next generation city operation center to improve the public safety and incident management of the city. And in 2020, they released the mobile app for citizens. So the citizens can see the information from those integrated data. And in 2020, as we all remember, the pandemic was started. So when they released mobile app, the citizen can get the benefit from like checking how crowded the facilities like city offices that they need to go, and to determine when they can really go there and so on. So those data sharing through platform, through mobile application has been quite useful in Lisbon. That is one first case that I'd like to mention. And next one is the case in Takamatsu and in Japan. And Takamatsu City has also the fireware for the data sharing, and they have been building up the several domains of the applications like disaster resiliency or tourism or welfare or traffic safety, mobility, and they are using it for the providing the services. And they form a Smart City Takamatsu Council from the beginning. They started in 2017. And it was one of the very first council, which is not only for the community development, but for the aim of the data utilization. And because it's quite early activity, they had many struggles and which data can be open and who can get the access. And it was not easy to determine, and it's not very straightforward because it was very early. But now they have been go through those struggle, and they have the Open Data Takamatsu website available, and all the data sets available to be accessed, and also visualization on the map, and you can select which data to be visualized on the map and so on. So now those data sets are available in the various format like text, Excel format, and also RDF. And also they determined to provide them under the license of Creative Commons copyright and so on. So it's the open data site is getting matured and data is increasing. And one more thing about Takamatsu City is they are sharing the data with the neighboring cities. So, and they are sharing the platform, and also they are sharing the data. So Takamatsu City, and together with the Kan-on-the City and Ayakawa Town, they are operating the disaster management dashboard. And those dashboard has the data of the traffic and weather forecast or water level in the river, tide level in the sea, and so that they can have the real-time data available, and they can concentrate about the important decision making. For example, to when to really give the traffic control on the specific road, or they provide the recommendation or alert for the evacuation, first to the vulnerable people, and second to all the citizens and so on. So the wide area disaster management and data sharing, and use the city OS to have for the collaboration is the kind of the advanced activity in Takamatsu. And second case from Japan is in Kakogawa City. They started also in the same time around 2017, and they started from the watch over application. So which means they have now over 1,500 cameras around across the city, and they are using it for the monitoring. And because the camera and monitoring the email video is quite sensitive topics. So in the beginning, they have been very thought through preparation was made. Like city mayor visited the 12 locations in the city to have the open meetings to explain and talk to the citizen directly and so on. So, and also define the very clear regulation from the beginning to give the transparency and the transparency about the data usage, or where the location of the cameras and so on. So the why they started watch over application was the high crime rates. They were in the top 10 list in the nationwide for the crime rates, and they tried to reduce lower the crime rates. And this camera monitoring will be will deter the crime occurrence, and it's really works. And as a result, comparing to 2017, the last year in 2021, they reduced the crime rates in half in 4 years. So I believe the citizens now know the benefits and the improvement of the QOL in the city. And so this data, together with the sensing data or open data, they are providing the open data catalog sites from Kakogawa City and in the data set to access in the various format and also the visualization on the maps. And in Kakogawa City case, they are opening the data specifically through API. So if you apply for the API access, you can get the access to the fireware which hosting the open data. So that's about the open data utilization through the cases of the smart cities. Now I'd like to look into the smart city initiative in Japan, especially for the audience from UK to know, for you to know. So Japan's government has several initiatives for smart city and open data. And regarding the open data in 2016, there was a basic act on advancement of public-private sector data utilization, which means basically to the local government to mandate the open up the data, or to give the open data available for the private sector to utilize and for the new innovation using the data and so on. And but as of now, the 68% of the cities, towns, and prefectures have open data available. I think this is very good number, and the remaining around 30% is small towns like below 50,000 population. So I think this is quite good and reasonable number now. And the most recent initiative is Digital Garden City Nation initiative, and there was a grants and available, and the grants were adapted last month to 27 and plus 700 projects, and the total number of the total amount is 20 billion yen, which is approximately 120 million pounds. And sorry, I put the number of projects on this slide, but if I say in the count the number of groups, it is in total 503 groups get the grants allocated. So groups basically means cities, towns, or prefectures. So we have in Japan, we have 1,700 local government, and 500 groups are getting the moving forward with these grants. Is very good movement for the smart city. But still, among those 27 projects, plus some more existing projects are using the CityOS, which means ready for the more complex or advanced utilization of the open data or personal data. So we are hoping to those starters, type 1 projects, will start from simple application to go up the ladder to the more advanced data utilization to expand the smart city implementation. So it was a quick view on the initiatives, and lastly, I'd like to talk about way forward we are seeing from our experience and knowledge. And so we have a lot of pilot and also the grants are very good backup for the progress of the smart city. But still, we are in a transit phase from pilot to scale. Scale here means the real social implementation. And we see 3 keys to go over the phase from pilot to scale. So what I'd like to do is to share the idea of how to address to those one by one. Number 1 is to share the output and data across cities, which means some cities are ahead and they already have the successful output. So why don't we replicate to the other cities? And to make the replication and the utilization easier, the importance is the architecture sharing. And for the architecture Japanese government already published the Smart City Reference Architecture and also Smart City Guidebook. So those are the quite good foundation for the architecture sharing. So following the architecture is on the left side of this slide. It contains about the city OS, and which is the foundation for the data utilization, and as well as the city management. So for smart city operation, government needs to have the strategy and design the organization and so on. So both city OS and city management aspects are covered to operate smart city services, and based on the regulation and rules and interpretabilities also mentioned. So this is one of the key to spread out the data utilization or output of the smart city very quickly to the other cities across Japan. And also if anyone from like UK today joining here are interested into the smart city in Japan, I think this is a good start point to read through, because all those documents are fully written and published in English as well. And all those documents are something that local government should be reading as well. And second point was set measurable target, and to use the data, the target why we use the data is quite important to move forward. And in case of smart city, it's not more than economical benefit, but it should be social outcome. And we believe this is the well-being is the one. I'm borrowing 2 slides from actually Nagumo-san today. The audience from Japan now look familiar with these light blue slides. So livable well-being city indicator is to give the idea of how citizens see the city, like a spider chart, or for that each city can express the current status of the well-being of the city as an indication. And those indicator use the quite a lot of open data, as like shown on the right side. The vertical axis is the cities, and the horizontal axis is the type of the open data, like the accommodation or childcare or welfare or shopping convenience and so on. So I'd like to mention here is the open data together with the well-being indicator will be getting more and more important. Open data will be used, and also the result of the process will be shown to the citizens or many stakeholders around smart city. So this is one, and also well-being indicator is recommended by digital agency in Japan for all the cities to apply to have the smart city operation. So open data usage in the well-being context also increased. And the last point, the third point, is reinforce financial feasibility. So financial feasibility means for the cities, the revenue and expenditure balance, but not only that, as well, also the private sector's business feasibility in smart city is important. We need to seek the maybe new models or new public-private collaboration models, schemes, and so on. And we believe this should be the joint effort in the ecosystem, all the stakeholders together to find out new models for the more stable, sustainable smart city operation. And for that purpose, we have new consortium for smart city social implementation. In collaboration with Smart City Institution Japan, this consortium is aiming to have more progress in the smart city. And NEC is one of the initiator of the consortium, but it's totally different, separate entity from NEC, and it's quite neutral and invite for any private companies or public sectors and more to join. And it has a name in English, which is Smart City Shared FAB, and it has the name as FAB because it has the platform, CityOS platform, available for the members to try. And so in the consortium, we expect the private companies and public sectors and the other group of companies or other group of entities will discuss and find out new ideas and try out the new idea or service creation there, utilizing the platform, CityOS platform, which that consortium is providing. So that's all that I prepared for today. And so open data has been essential for smart city pilots and also be important for social implementation we are trying to achieve. And so we as NEC also would like to keep contributing to the more stable, secure use of the open data, and also the innovation using the open data for the smart cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishioka-san. That was very comprehensive update. Thank you very much. And I'm very delighted to see that our Smart Cities Institute's livable well-being indicators are covered in the presentation. Thank you very much. All right, so let's invite everyone to come to the screen and start the open discussion. So everyone come in. And also for the audiences, it's time for you to also write the message questions to us. I'll pick them up and ask questions to whoever is asked to, or we discuss on the topic you raise in the chat box. All right, so let's move on to the discussion. And let's begin from Olivier's slides. I was interested in the stewardship idea, which has been utilized in the private companies, for their data management. I'm from the banking sector, so bankers are more familiar with the data management, the data governance ideas inside the organization. Now, but we are talking about more open environment beyond the private sector, moving on to the public sector or the social sector and so forth. So could you talk a little bit more about who should be playing the key role for the data stewardship for this more public environment?
Sure, thank you. Great question, I think there's two examples I would want to give there, and I'm gonna stick to the banking and finance sector. So that's a good prompt, and also because the banking and finance sector is actually one of the pioneering sectors in data stewardship and good data governance. One example that I will give is open banking, which is an initiative that has been running first in the UK a few years back and has actually been adopted in a few other countries. And that's the idea that regulated sectors can do better with data. And by that, I mean both creating standards, and interoperability was actually a big part of what Nishioka-san was talking about. It's a very important thing. And so standards for open data, for instance, can banks provide open data about where their ATMs are or tariffs and so on and so forth, but also data stewardship for the customers through not open data but shared data. So there's a concept of data portability that is very important when you want to do things like switch banks, which is something that requires data about, and so the Open Banking Initiative created those standards and is governing those standards so that individuals can, for instance, switch banks or create, or for private companies and startups to create services above the banking ecosystem. And that is an example of data stewardship that creates innovation, that creates better outcomes for people. The other example I wanted to mention very briefly, because I mentioned data stewardship in London, was the work that the Greater London Authority, so City Hall in London, did with MasterCard in 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. There were lockdowns in the UK, as you may recall, and the team of the Mayor of London wanted to know what the effect of lockdowns were on businesses, but also on people. And what they did was they worked with MasterCard to understand the effect of lockdowns on footfall and transactions in the high street, so in shops in different areas of London. And so that was in my view a great example of data stewardship. MasterCard, private sector organization, worked with a public sector organization, shared data in ways that was anonymized, in ways that was safe. There was no individual transaction, but it was all aggregated. But it was actually a really good way for the London Mayor team to understand which neighborhoods were very affected negatively and which ones were actually positively affected by lockdowns because people were shopping more locally than in central areas. Those are examples of data stewardship, and they're not. And you may notice they're not just examples of data stewardship with open data. Data stewardship can be done through sharing of data that is safe and secure, and that's a big part of it too.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I recall my days in banking that we started from the safeguarding assets. That's the purpose of using data, and then we started from the protection side or defense side, and gradually moved up to a more active use of data for value creations or innovation and so forth. And we may mimic the same idea to the public sector, right? And the great example, the MasterCard, they naturally own the data, but they didn't, close the door, but about open the door for the public use. So everyone is benefited from the use of data. Great example. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Thank you.
Any comments or any questions on this point? This is actually a great example. Maybe in Japan too, we can ask, former bankers to come to the public sector to innovate the use of data in the public sector or social sectors. And also the credit card companies will be a great resources if you use the data intelligently.
I just wanted to add to Olivier's point. This isn't about explicit organizations, but I think there are, when it comes to data stewardship, there are kind of 6 key roles that organizations can take. One of them is around putting protections in place around sensitive data and how you grant access to sensitive data to allow for more of the innovation type activities. I think there's an important role that doesn't often get talked about, which is around combining or linking data sets from multiple different organizations. And some organizations, or most organizations that collect data and might have data that would be useful when combined with other data sources, don't generally play that role themselves. I think that the organizations who have open data expertise play an important role around data stewardship, being able to either make data accessible themselves or provide that expertise to other organizations who want to improve the way that others can access, use, and share data that they collect or produce. There's also really key roles around developing and maintaining identifiers, standards, and other infrastructure that allow people to more easily access and use data. And then I think that there's two more. One is around kind of acting as a gatekeeper for data held by other organizations. So there are some organizations who might play the role around specifically providing access to either citizens or to other companies. And then lastly, there's a role to be played by organizations who basically communicate with communities or individuals about how data is being stewarded or used about them. So taking a more active role in enabling people to have a say in the conversation about data about them, I think is lastly quite important too.
Thank you very much. Now we are talking about how we could more effectively and efficiently share the data across multiple sectors. And we have several options to consider. I think one is that public sector, like a government, can be a data stewardship, one choice. And maybe not for profit organization, maybe ODI, or my organization, well, specially designed organization for not for profit purposes, can be kind of the intermediary kind of function to link the data and maybe secure the right use of data. That's another one. The third idea that I can mention is that we can ask professionals to professional companies to take care of the data, like asset management company in the financial sector. Citizens cannot really safeguard the data in a professional manner. So, those who has more professional knowledge, expertise, should be able to better control the data. So we can pay a fee for the company to take care of data more effectively and efficiently. That's the rough idea, 3 options I mentioned. Any comments or any opposition or any agreement on ideas that I mentioned? Maybe Dr. Jiahui?
Hi. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I think, well, given sort of what I do at my company, which is to kind of really work with companies and kind of make strategic advice about technology and organization for innovation and that sort of thing. I think open data is a really interesting, well, as a citizen, I'm very excited by open data, and as someone who works in innovation, it opens up so many avenues, and the idea of having, I think in the last decade, so much more data that has become available as open data is brilliant. But the reality is that when advising a company about it, in our current state, it's an investment. It's a huge investment on their part without a guaranteed success or a simple measurable way of knowing what the value of doing this is going to be, right? And I think sort of having organizations like yourself, like ODI, like Smart City Institute is fantastic to help guide that. It's interesting because I think of our current situation with open data a little bit like sustainability maybe 10, 20 years ago, right? That at that point it was a CSR. It was something you did because it was for the benefit of society, but you kind of did it out the goodness of your heart, which means at the corporate level it meant PR. That's really the value that you have out of that. But of course now it's completely changed. Sustainability development goals are used the world over and are driving billions, trillions of dollars worth of investment and innovation, and is generating businesses for everyone. And I think there is that sort of, I think almost people need to keep that sort of story in mind as to why we might want to, invest time and effort into opening up data, into making people more of these things available. Because you're right, Olivier, people think of it primarily as coming from government, and they're supposed to do something that benefits us because we elect them. But for companies, I think there's a lot of value there. But I think it will take some effort to get more companies involved.
Great point. Olivier, James, any comments back to Dr. Jeffy?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. I completely agree. And at the Open Data Institute, we've been working with companies and governments for a long time, and we've seen that shift. We've seen, it started as a government thing, but there's much more of an awareness from companies about how open data and data sharing can create positive outcomes for them. We did a bit of work, I think a couple of years ago, classifying the types of value that the private sector can see in open data, and that really runs a really broad gamut from creating trust, which is really important. Being transparency does that, but it also creates collaboration. It enables innovation, and the most important, that's something that you were just hinting at, is that it's one thing that allows us to collaborate on some of the major challenges. And it's interesting that you pointed at sustainable development goals, because we've got things like the future of work or health or climate change being massive challenges, and that's going to sound a bit pompous, but we are not going to fix all those big things without collaboration from all sectors. And we're really seeing in the past few years an awareness in the private sector that they hold data, information, knowledge that can be used to fight things like climate change or can help with creating a healthier society. So I agree with you. We're at the beginning of this, and we're shifting, and it's great. It means maturation. We're shifting from fairly performative view of open data to a much more purposeful view of open data and sharing of data. And for me, that is the main development that is the most positive, because it's not just for its sake. It's got a purpose, it's got a goal, and there's a big impact that can be created with it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree as well. I think we've moved away from this. I remember in the early days of open data, there was a lot of competition by governments around the world to be the highest on the open data barometer, or the organizations or governments that were most widely recognized as doing good things with open data. And I think what came with that was, as Olivier said, a lot of performative action, a lot of bringing in some fairly light touch regulations, for example, to get companies or to get local governments publishing a bit of open data that only went as far as publishing, and then nothing ever really happened beyond that. And I think now what we're seeing is a lot more willingness and understanding from across different sectors by organizations to publish open data or engage with the idea of open data, and work much more collaborative around how we create useful things from that data and ultimately make kind of better decisions.
Great point. So it's an intersection between social values and private money, so to speak, values, financial values, so to speak, right? And yeah, we are facing similar issues in Japan too. Not everything is free, not everything is for money. So there are two things we have to do, the balancing act. And the common discussion in Japan is that it's almost like two stairs house. The first stair is like a more of the common area for everyone, right? And on top of that, you have a more competition area, free market zone. So without having the first stair, you cannot really do anything with the data. So you have to first build more, how do you say, open data that is for more of the social values, public values. And on top of that, companies are requested to create a value for money through the competition. So you can maintain, financial stability and also social stability at the same time. Do you have a similar idea in the UK? Maybe yes. Right. Yeah. And also, we've been talking about the vendor lock-in for years, not for data, but more of the, the more of the hardware kind of stuff, right? The server and the IT equipment, and so forth. And we are now also doing a balancing act, standardize to a certain extent. After that, free competition, right? If the standards are fragmented, then there's no interoperability of data after the implementation. But once we have standardization shared amongst the key players in the business, now companies can adopt the standardized approach and compete for better quality and better price. Similar idea in UK too?
Yeah, very similar idea. I am not the most expert. Some of the colleagues on the panel might be able to add to this, but there's definitely a national data strategy that looks at things like enabling innovation, enabling competition, but also creating positive outcomes for citizens. So very much that similar. Maybe not in opposition, but looking at it holistically, looking at the whole picture and understanding that data can be used for many things if it's well governed.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's move on to the second topic, again from Olivier's slides, data ethics canvas, which looks very attractive, easy to understand visually. And as you mentioned, it's more international than just for UK. You mentioned that some Japanese universities are involved in this initiative. So I'm expecting that we will see this in Japanese version elsewhere going forward. Would you talk a little bit about the genesis of this data ethics canvas? It's more for elevating the data literacy of the citizens. What's the genesis and the purpose of this?
Yeah, thank you very much. The genesis of data ethics was related to two things. We started, I think we started working on the data ethics canvas, but more generally on data ethics around 2017. And for us, it came from two things. One was an internal realization. So by then we at the ODI had been working on open data for half a decade, and we knew that making data more open would create positive outcomes, but we were seeing a lack of trust. We did a few surveys a few years running, and we were seeing that most citizens did not trust organizations, public, private. I mean, it varies. And it goes up and down. Some organizations have very low levels, get very low levels of trust. Others get higher. For instance, in the UK, places like local government and the NHS are very trusted with data. Whereas hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone, but advertisers, for instance, are getting very low levels of trust for data. So we knew that there was a distrust, and we knew basically that citizens were starting to just refuse to be part of the data ecosystem. They didn't want data about them to be collected. At that same time, we had a few scandals, one of them being the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which some of you may remember, if I'm not mistaken, 2018, 2019. And that really sped up the levels of distrust. And so for us, who we wanted to push for a more open data ecosystem, we had to realize that you can't have more open data if you don't have trust, and for that you need things like ethics. And so we started working on the data ethics canvas around then, 2017, 2018, developing it for anyone working with data. And we kept it really agnostic. It's not just for governments, it's not just for companies. Any team working on a data project, collecting data, sharing data, can ask themselves those questions. And we kept it simple. As you said, it's visually attractive. It's just a few questions. It is a tool. We built a few things upon that. We have, for instance, things like the data ethics maturity assessment. So when you have started your journey towards data ethics, you can assess how far you are and how far you can go. But for us, what's been really great is that we've seen the canvas downloaded and used in, I think, 50 countries. We've had people, including the Department of Social Science at the university at Waseda University, to translate it so that it can be used in more countries. So it has hit a nerve. We know that teams want to do well with data. We know that people want to minimize potential harm. We know that people want to build trust with their customers and their citizens. And so this is one of many tools that can help do that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, trust is an important issue, also faced in Japan. The global research by Edelman a trust barometer indicated that the trust level in Japan towards the government and the technology is one of the lowest amongst the OECD countries. So we are facing very serious issues as well in terms of the trust. Maybe Nishioka-san and Jack, you have any comments about trust issues, maybe in Japan, or a comparative view between the two countries?
I'm happy to come in. So as part of my role, I'm basically here to bridge the gap between the UK and Japan on all of our top digital and data priorities. So we work closely with Japan on everything from telecoms, vendor diversification to cross-border data flows and digital government transformation, any areas where the UK and Japan are prioritizing and very natural partners. And one of those areas is data free flow with trust. We are very supportive of each other in G7 last year, where the UK presidency proposed a work stream on DFFT. Japan obviously coined the concept of DFFT, and we've been working together bilaterally and multilaterally to operationalize the concept. And I'm really excited for Japan's presidency next year to see where we can take that again in the G7. One of the tangible projects we're working on this year is a senior government-to-government director general's level group, a digital group, where we're going to focus on deepening and strengthening collaboration in various digital and data topics. We announced this back in May. And all of the relevant Japanese ministries will be part of this group, as will all of the UK relevant departments. So this is a really great opportunity, and it builds directly on our gold standard digital commitments in our UK-Japan FTA. So I think one of my questions here is that the UK and Japan are so naturally aligned on lots of these topics, and the kind of atmosphere is so ripe for further collaboration. It feels like areas like open data are naturally where we should be talking further. And in that sense, what kind of projects should we be focusing on to really maximize the value and take advantage of the time, because it feels like now is the time to be talking about these issues. We're slightly ahead of the curve in having these conversations today. There's lots of potential, and this potential is only going to grow. So really keen to hear from the presenters and the panelists today on those ideas. Thanks.
Great idea. Thank you very much, Jack. And right, so I will make 2 points. One is that the under the FFT and related initiatives under Japanese government, as Nishioka-san mentioned, we create a lot of intellectual assets, so to speak, such as guidebook or the CTO's architectures, all downloadable in English. And thank you for Nishioka-san. We are now implementing livable well-being city indicators, right? So those are the kind of assets we can exchange and talk between the two countries. Maybe cross-breed, exchange ideas and evolve from there. And having the binational conferences on the topic of the data and smart cities is one of the options we have. Getting to know each other, deepening the ideas and collaborate is something we can do together. Nishioka-san, any comments from your side?
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to mention 2 points. One is about the trust. Digital trust consists of maybe several kind of layers, components, like technology is one thing, and regulation is one thing, awareness is another thing, and so on. So if we share the progress of each layers or combination of the components to form the digital trust between UK and Japan, that will be quite beneficial. That is one thing. And I was trying to think about what data we'd like to use from UK if it is available. But if it is like water level in the river, we don't need that because we are too far. But Nagumo-san's comments gave me some insight to me about, but maybe we don't straight away to exchange the data itself, but we can share the idea what kind of data should be opened, and using the combination of the open data, what kind of the analysis or well-being indicator visualization or outcomes from the open data can be shared, even though we have the different social systems. For example, welfare insurance system might be different, but we can share the idea how to combine the data to come up with the result which can improve the social benefit and increase the impact. That could be quite interesting. And thanks to Jack, I came to know about the G2G collaboration, so which is really encourage us in private sector as well as I believe in the public sector. So those 2 points I thought your comments gave me some ideas.
Thank you, Nishioka-san. So in addition to the G2G collaboration, we can also talk about, private to private, B2B.
Right.
The Smart City Shared FAB and my organization, Smart City Institute Japan, can work together with Olivier's institution to, design mutual benchmarking practices, maybe using some kind of a maturity scale to see where we are, each one of us, for example. How does it sound to you, Olivier?
There is definitely a good set of use cases for B2B collaboration around data. The main challenges that we see with that is that very often when you have attempts at collaboration in B2B, you have a setting that is typically a setting of competition. So organizations don't always know how to collaborate with data when their basic modus operandi is competition. And actually, I go back to one concept we have been talking about throughout today's webinar is that's when intermediaries are important. Intermediaries can be trusted by all parties to make sure that that there's no power imbalance, that data is being stewarded securely, that there's no that risk can be minimized. That typically is the way we've seen collaboration really blossom in the B2B space, is through intermediaries, through institutions that steward data for, and then the beauty of it is that when you have that set of intermediaries, then those intermediaries can work with not just B2B, but also work with citizens, with governments, and so on and so forth. And that's where we have a really great variety. And I'm actually going back to one question we had in the chat earlier, which was about data trust. And what's really important to know is that there are many ways of creating that stewardship. In the B2B space, we have a lot of things like data marketplaces, data clubs, which are really good at creating data flows and collaboration in B2B. But in other cases, data trusts, where you really need that independence, the entrusting of data to an independent third party might be better. But there's many ways to do it. There's data collaboratives, there's data cooperatives. There are sometimes data institutions like, as I was talking about earlier, statistics bodies that are in their own right institutions that steward data. And for me, that's figuring out what do we want the collaboration, what do we want the outcome to be, and then creating the right intermediary, creating the right institution is the way to go. But yeah, other than that, kind of one-to-one collaboration or kind of informal collaboration without intermediaries is really quite hard, especially in the B2B space, as I've seen anyway.
Yeah, thank you for more precisely expressing what I intended to say. So intermediary to intermediary collaboration to start with, right? That's safer. Right, I agree with you. And in the interest of time, let me just move on to the questions from the audiences in the chat box. First one, Masaru Yarime-san. What would be the role of the data trust in the context of data stewardship? I understand that the data trust would be an independent entity for managing various kinds of data collected in the smart city. It seems that the data trust takes a rather centralized approach to data governance, which seems to be different from one more decentralized approach taken in Japanese smart cities. I think this is targeted to Olivier.
Yes, thank you. I'll briefly answer this because I just talked about somewhat that subject. It's a really good question, and it's basically I'll get back to an answer that says it depends. In some cases, you want a centralized approach to data stewardship. You want an independent body to centralize the data and steward its access. But in some cases, you don't need a data trust. You don't need all the governance that goes with it. A data trust has mechanisms like fiduciary duty, which is, it's quite heavy. You have other ways of having data intermediaries that are more flexible. And some data intermediaries and some data institutions don't even centralize the data. You can be an intermediary that creates collaboration. For instance, we could see standard initiatives. So organizations coming together to create a standard for data interoperability. That in itself is a way of stewarding data, of creating collaboration, but that remains decentralized. So you've got a variety of approaches, data trust being one of them for cases where you have data that is perhaps more sensitive. So data trusts for instance, health data makes sense. But in other cases, you want openness, you want decentralization. But in order to do that, you need also interoperability. And so the centralization, decentralization is on a spectrum, and you have different needs and different institutions that can support that.
Okay, thank you very much.
And if I could just add a comment to that, I think one of the biggest challenges with open data, as I understand it, is discoverability, right? The ability to actually just find the data and who has it, where is it, and what data is available to people. I think that's not a small problem, especially if you think about how many languages it exists in the world, as well as lots of different countries put up data, and private companies. So I think there's something to be considered, that a centralized approach does help with that. If all government data from the UK is in one place, that's an easy place. You know where to go to get it. But if 100 companies around the world are pushing their data out on their own platforms, then you sort of need to know it exists, or hope that Google's dataset search gets better and better at helping you find the right data set. So there's also that aspect.
Okay, thank you very much for making great points. And let's move on to the second question, actually from Jack to Olivier and Nishioka-san.
Sorry, Tak, I think we covered this. I also asked it earlier, so.
Okay, so should I move on to the next one?
Please.
Okay, so then Fukaya-san, how the privacy issues are handled in this coming open data environment under the trusted stewardship? Little short question, but anyone willing to comment? Everyone's shrugging.
I'm happy to try
Sure.
tackling it. I'm sure Nishioka-san will have a view on kind of the more the implementation of it, which is really important with data platforms. That's a big question, but essentially, as I was saying in my talk, or actually hinting at in my talk, most of the time when we have open data, there is no inherent privacy challenge, because most of what is open data is not data directly about people. It's very very high level. It's data about infrastructure. It's data about the place, and so on and so forth. But there is a set of mechanisms and a set of principles that can help govern privacy whenever taking data about people and then making it more open. And that includes things like aggregation, anonymization, and some more technical methods such as privacy enhancing technology, so federated learning, homomorphic encryption, and so on and so forth. It's quite complex, but there are technical means. The important thing that we've learned at the ODI, looking at that, is both that the technology is not yet well understood, and so it's really quite complicated for organizations, including governments, to really know which technology to use to enable the sharing and opening of what was private data. Anonymization is really misunderstood. People think that it's a binary thing, whereas it's actually kind of a gradual process. So the flip side, and that's maybe what I would encourage people who are interested in that conjunction of privacy and open data, is actually its culture, its skills. One of the really great frameworks for privacy and open data was actually created by the ONS in the UK, and it's called the 5 Safes framework. And it's one way to really think about how do you safely manage data? How do you safely anonymize the data when you want to publish it? So I would point to that. But it's technology has a big part to play, and I will actually ask Nishioka-san to come in about how privacy is managed by NEC in the open data platforms. But it is also about skills. It is also about kind of frameworks, and that's where things like 5 Safes or things like data ethics can come in to help manage the risk.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can add from, as Olivier mentioned, technology also can help. For example, if the open data is the from camera and it is video, and there is technology available to recognize the face and mask over it before somebody see it. The video analytics engine itself is process the data to make it a little bit anonymous. So technology can help in that way, but also and also the data exchange platform can control which ID, which access source can access the specific data and so on. So technology can help that way, but still, which kind of information should be masked or not is decision by people. And also, if this access can be allowed to this data or not, it's also the decision aspect. So it's the responsibility can be shared between technology or platform, or the management of the data, or the regulation also can take the role. So it all shared, and so somebody should see through end to end, which if all the necessary aspects are covered.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for James as well to putting additional information. And in the interest of time, we have to close this session momentarily. And I think this session has turned out to be a good starting point for deepening our collaboration, efforts going forward. And with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Richard Luis for final comments, just briefly, and then we close this session. Mr. Richard Luis, do you want to say something for us?
And it's been a very, very interesting session, and it just shows how close Japan and the UK are on open data. And I think the initiatives that the UK and Japanese government are doing to facilitate data flows will enable more innovation and collaboration between Japanese and UK companies going into the future. And the world is connected, so sharing of data between jurisdictions is going to become more important as time goes by to solve common interests like climate change and other societal problems. So very, very, very interesting, and I think what we've got from the Open Data Institute for their data ethics canvas is a good starting point for discussions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we understand that we have a lot in common based upon our historical alliance between the two countries, and I'm expecting more fruitful discussion going forward for mutual benefits. Thank you very much. With this, we close this session. Thank you for attending this session.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, Kudo-san for the follow-up updates.
Yes, this is Kudo, and thank you all for joining this session from Britain, from Singapore, and from Tokyo as well, and also the viewers from across the world. Thank you very much. And I'd like to briefly go through Smart City and the closing. And this is the introduction of the Smart City Institute. And first of all, we would appreciate if you cooperate with the questionnaire and you will receive after this event. And also our future programs of the webinars will be available on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, those SNSs, as well as our website and PTX. And past videos can be viewed on our YouTube channel as well. And I just like to explain a little bit about the future programs. I'm sorry, but it's all in Japanese. But next Thursday, July 21st, we have a Smart City by Generation Z. And we welcome the Professor Kunimatsu from Chuo University, as well as the students of her seminar. And they will propose the future city planning. And also July 27th, we have a so-called monthly pitch, 7 minutes. This is our 10th program and a very popular one. This is an online matching event with local governments and startup companies, as you can see. So they will talk and discuss. And also, this is a very special seminar that will be held in Maebashi City in Gunma Prefecture. It happens on Sunday, July 31st, and in the morning from 10:30 to 12 o'clock in Japan time. And we will talk about towards the realization of well-being city development and learn from Digital Green City, Maebashi City. And the mayor of Maebashi City will be planned to attend. And this will be online as well. And also lastly, we would like to touch a little bit upon Barcelona Smart City Expo World Congress, which will be held in November this year. And you may know that this is one of the largest smart city event, which will be held in Barcelona. And our Smart City Institute Japan will exhibit Japan Pavilion to showcase Japan initiatives in smart cities. And also we will conduct Barcelona Smart City study tours. So if you are interested, please contact us. And about Smart City Institute Japan, our membership number of members is growing. It's now about 540 with 36 advisors. And also livable and well-being city indicators, we developed this. And we have a great partners in global partners. And today we would like to say thank you for the British Embassy Tokyo to make this webinar happen. So thank you, Arai-san. So with this, we would like to close today's webinar. Thank you for attending and please have a nice day.